You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 6th of May 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up on today's program.
Weitergeht und wir Sie weiter informieren wegen anderer Wahlgänge. Damit ist die Sitzung unterbrochen.
Berlin is left stunned after a new coalition government to be led by Friedrich Merz fails to get past parliament. You heard the moment there. What happens next is uncharted territory for post-war Germany. From there, we'll look at why North Korea is sending migrant workers to Russia in addition to troops. We'll focus in on Italy's own frontrunners for the Vatican conclave, and after that...
I can say that Finnish media is very, very free. We are very proud that we have a free media.
Finland's Deputy Prime Minister speaks to us on the anniversary of the BBC World News Finnish section and the state of the global media. We'll also be joined by Monocle's Natalie Theodosi after that for a roundup of the night that was at the Met Gala in New York. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. It is a first in German post-war history. What was supposed to be a ceremonial vote in parliament to usher in a new German government has failed after a secret ballot. If that weren't enough, the two prospective partners who had agreed a coalition deal, that would be the Christian Democrats and Social Democrats, are both claiming it wasn't them. Chancellor in waiting Friedrich Merz, who had already made plans to visit Paris and Warsaw, has been forced to cancel his diplomatic duties, and the certainty and leadership that Germany had been hoping for from a new government is being thrown into question. Well, I'm now joined by Andrew Bulkley, co-founder of 20% Berlin, a newsletter for Berlin's foreign population. Andrew, thanks very much for coming on the show. This has left Berlin pretty stunned, hasn't it? Do we have any idea how this could have happened?
What this really is just a sign of how thin the majority is that this coalition has. You know, in percentages, they don't even have a majority. Not a majority of people elected this party to be in the parliament. It's only when you divided it into seats that they ended up with this 328 seat majority in a parliament of 621 seats. And so all you needed was a couple of people who, maybe two or three people who didn't get the minister position they thought they deserved, a couple other people who maybe Merz wasn't too nice to a couple of times, and then a couple of people from the center-left SPT on the other side who just do not want to buddy up with a conservative government, and you end up with not enough votes. They needed 316 votes. They should have had 328, but they only got 310. So they're going to have to call in some favors and get a few more people over to their side.
That's still a pretty big number for a time where there had been a coalition deal all said and done. What do you expect to happen next? There's been a lot of wrangling right now. Another vote, I understand, can take place within 2 weeks. One party is saying it might still happen today. Another party, the CDU, is saying we're not doing it today, maybe tomorrow.
Well, it kind of changes by the minute. It's funny, you and I used to work together for a newspaper here in Berlin, and I sort of wished you and I were sitting in that newsroom covering this right now as we would have at that newspaper, because it changes by every 15 minutes about whether there will be an election today or if they'll wait. Legally, they would have to wait 48 hours to do another election. But they could all vote and say, no, it's okay, we can do it right now. So you'd have a first vote that says we can do another vote and then do another vote. But the CDU is not going to put up with another embarrassment. They're going to make sure they've got all of their ducks in a row. I'm certain they're going to call in some favors from other parties who voted against it just out of practice the first time around. They're going to make sure they have a majority before they do the vote. So before they have a certain majority in the back rooms, they're not going to come out and allow the vote to go forward. They do basically have 2 weeks to get this done. After that, it gets a little bit more iffy. Merz, in the end, is going to be chancellor within the next 2 weeks. Just how it happens is the open question.
Well, on the how it happens, though, when you mention this idea of them maybe going to other parties, one of those, the left party, as I understand, said, well, we'll be in talks, but we don't want Friedrich Merz. So is there any small chance that Friedrich Merz actually loses out from all of this? Or just to ask another way, how much is Friedrich Merz himself damaged by all of this politically and personally? He has wanted this job for such a long time.
I think with politicians, as long as they win, they're happy. I think that's what their eye on the goal is. But I think politically, of course, he's damaged. This is the only chancellor since the war who failed in the first vote, who didn't get elected right away. So there is a question of, is this really our chancellor? Is this the guy people want? Not even your own friends, your fellow politicians want you, apparently. So of course he's dented as a politician, and by every debate, by every public appearance, this is going to come up. But it's ultimately going to have to be him, or otherwise it's going to be new elections. So the CDU is going to call in every favor. They're going to make sure everybody in their own party is on board. It has to be Friedrich Merz. And this also isn't a good sign to the rest of the world at this time. I mean, historic events now are almost boring at this point this year, but it is certainly historic, and it's a problem for his chancellorship, but Germany doesn't have a choice.
But also what's incredible about this, Andrew, is they have to go on like a detective hunt right now, don't they? This was a secret ballot, so they don't even know which parliamentarians actually voted against him.
That's also a problem, because then nobody's going to admit to it. Probably 2 or 3 people will admit to it, because that's their role in the party, is to be the ones, the naysayers. But then it's going to be rumor and hearsay, which also isn't good for a party. This is a time they barely have this majority. They need to keep sticking together. And now you've already got everybody looking over their shoulders about who's going to put a knife in their back the next time. So they're going to need to also do some house cleaning internally and get everybody toeing the line.
And also, Andrew, you did mention there, Germany's leadership in Europe, the impact it could have on that. This was supposed to be that moment of stability, an end to intra-party infighting after the last three-way coalition completely collapsed in infighting. Paris and Warsaw visits now cancelled. How much damage does this do to that reputation?
Certainly Germany has always just been seen as kind of the big, nerdy, boring person in the room. And now we're finding out, no, there is a little bit of fire there. There is a little bit of drama. I think that Schadenfreude is a German word. I think everybody can now laugh and say, oh, Germany isn't as perfect as we always thought it was. And maybe that's good. Maybe that makes Germans human. I mean, the one thing Germans are known for is not being human. So now we find out, oh, they are fallible. Not everything works as smooth as a Mercedes-Benz car. I think everybody else knows politics are politics, and you can always do a Paris visit next week.
You can do a Paris next week. And just finally on that point, Andrew, do we expect that if Merz gets across the line in a second vote, it's all said and done and we can forget about this?
I think so. I hope so. I think everybody wants it to. They're essentially doing the work. This coalition has promised to do the work that actually the previous coalition wanted to do, except for one politician who got in the way, so it fell apart. So, they're doing work that Germany's waiting for the government to do. We've been waiting them to do it for 6 months. So I think, a little bit of drama here. Fine, politicians, journalists get to have fun, and now let's just get on with the work. I don't think there's any other. Can't believe there's any other crises on the horizon, but wow, there's been a lot of crises we didn't see coming in the last 6 months.
That's certainly true, Andrew. I do wish we were back in that Berlin newsroom covering this at the moment. Andrew Bulkeley, journalist in Berlin, thank you very much for joining us. And now here's Laura Kramer with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. Flights have been suspended at 4 Moscow airports and others across Russia after overnight drone strikes from Ukraine, according to Kremlin officials. The strikes come as Moscow prepares for a major World War II anniversary parade on Friday, where President Vladimir Putin is due to speak. Estonia is hosting the world's biggest live cyber defense drill called Locked Shields 2025. More than 4,000 experts from over 40 countries are taking part in the exercise to defend critical infrastructure and national IT systems in a simulated attack. And Japanese scientists are building a battery that can power equipment in space for 100 years. Unlike solar panels or regular batteries, this new system will work under the extreme conditions found beyond Earth. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Laura. Now, on the heels of North Korea openly admitting last week that its soldiers were in Russia and fighting Ukraine, it now appears the relationship goes beyond soldiers to migrant workers. Russia, like many Western nations, has seen a falling birth rate in recent years and appears now to be turning to North Korea to fill the gap, particularly in the east of the country. And I'm joined now here in the studio by John Everard, former British ambassador to North Korea and Belarus. John, good to have you here. Good afternoon.
Hi, Chris.
How many workers are we talking about? Let's start there.
Surprise, surprise, neither North Korea nor Russia published the numbers, but the best estimate is around 15,000. So quite a lot in absolute terms, but you're looking at a labour shortage in Russia of about 1.5 million, so that in that context, the North Korean contribution doesn't even scratch the surface.
It doesn't scratch the surface, but nonetheless it is a big deal, in part because countries are banned by the UN Security Council from using North Korean workers. Russia is a member of that Security Council, although, of course, perhaps not currently a follower of its laws. Should we put it that way? But what have they said about this?
They, of course, have denied that they're breaking any sanctions, but what they've done is to bring in massive numbers of North Koreans on student visas and simply employ them as workers, mostly in forestry and construction. I see that the Wall Street Journal has dug out that something like 8,500 North Korean, quote, students, unquote, have entered Russia, of whom 130 have appeared at Russian universities.
So this is official data, in this words, even though Russia's not talking about migrant workers.
This is official data, that's right, yes. So it's fairly clear what is going on. And these workers are coveted by Russian companies. They work for almost nothing, and they'll work very long hours if you beat them hard enough. They are controlled by effectively North Korean gangmasters who make sure the discipline is maintained, and they don't go out and get drunk in the way that Russian workers in the Far East so often do. The problem is going to be when Russian companies in the west of Russia start to want their cut of the action. At the moment, as I said, most of the workers are out in the Far East. But there are moves to bring them further west into the major centres of population, and that is going to cause headaches, both because there is a deep-seated racism in the west of Russia against anybody with high cheekbones, as these North Koreans obviously have. The other thing is that effectively the Kremlin is using these workers to hold down wages in Russia, and naturally Russian workers as a whole, the unions, don't like this at all.
What does North Korea itself get out of this? Why is this being allowed?
Money. The deal is actually quite straightforward. That the workers are not hired directly. They are hired through manpower organisations in North Korea who will charge a fixed fee for providing however many people it is, and that fee includes a fat profit for the North Korean state, and also all the wages for the workers. So the state creams off something like 30% of the fee off the top from the Russians, and defectors have said that as well as that, it will also confiscate something like 90% of the wages that are nominally paid to the workers themselves. So the North Korean state makes a lot of money out of this.
It is a pretty incredible situation when you put it that way, John. Tell us also about the East, because this is, I suppose, what this is in part about. How far away is Vladimir Putin from his dream of creating this sort of industrial heartland out there?
A long, long way. I mean, the Russian Far East is still very wild and very woolly, very underpopulated. Even determined Kremlin attempts to bribe people to go there by handing out free land have been met by snorts of derision. People simply don't want to go that far away from any normal civilization. The transport network is primitive. The health services outside Vladivostok are not quite non-existent, but tending in that direction. And as for entertainment in the evening, vodka.
Just finally, John, how much will this have any impact on the actual war effort of Russia against Ukraine? Is it in any way about that as well, or is this purely about sort of economic growth in Russia?
Virtually everything in Russia these days is in some way linked to the war. So is this. You could say that in some ways the workers that the North Koreans are sending are replacing Russians who have been sent to the front. So you're covering the losses from the war. But this scheme has been going for a long, long time now, Chris. I mean, long before the war. So it wasn't actually prompted by the war, though it does obviously help Putin in his efforts in Ukraine.
John Everard, former ambassador to North Korea, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You are back with the briefing. I'm Chris Chermak. Now, after a week or so of frenzied speculation, tomorrow is the day when the conclave to elect a new pope begins in the Vatican. Now, over the last week, we've been looking at the possible successors from different parts of the world. And for today, we wanted to focus on the host nation, if you will. That would be Italy. The journalist and broadcaster and former Vatican correspondent Juliet Linley joins me now from our studio in Zurich. Juliet, we are so close at this point, but it has been a very, very long time since there's been an Italian pope.
Hello, Chris. Yes, there have been how many years is it? I think it's 47 years since we've had an Italian pope. The last one was Giovanni Paolo I, John Paul I. And he died after 33 days in office. Not a long time in office. I'm not going to go there with all the conspiracy theories that there are, Chris, regarding whether he was, whether he was murdered, whether he was got rid of. But fact of the matter is, he spent a very short time in office, and he was followed by the first Polish pope in history, who was Karol Wojtyła, who chose the same name, so he became John Paul II. So it's been 47 years, and there are several candidates that could be on the cards. But, I was in Rome for the funeral, and I was talking to people there, pilgrims especially, in the days leading up to the funeral. And I did have several saying to me, the time has come for us to reclaim the papacy. Now, they didn't mean it, let's say, in a nationalistic way, don't get me wrong, but a lot of them said, we love Cardinal Matteo Zuppi. I don't know if this is a name that has come up a lot in your TikTok feed lately, because I know there are others that are coming up a lot in different people's, but he was the Archbishop of Bologna. He's only 69 years old, which in cardinal years is quite young, and he's known for his diplomatic skills. He's worked a lot in the field, and he's also clashed a lot with right-wing leader of the Lega, Matteo Salvini. But he's known for being a missionary, and especially he was in the 90s very much involved in peacemaking in Mozambique, and now he's been involved in prisoner exchanges between Ukraine and Russia. But I have to say that there were other Italians telling me, no, forget an Italian pope. We want an Asian pope. And you know who we think is very simpatico is Luis Antonio Tagle, the Philippine cardinal. And by the way, he is being seen a lot on TikTok, although that is not necessarily going to mean that he is going to have more chances at being pope or not, because I really don't think a lot of the cardinals are looking at their social media feed. But back to your question, Chris, yes, is it time for an Italian pope? I say not sure.
Nobody's sure, Juliet. When we had Richard Heydarian from the Philippines on last week, he reversed it and said, well, he thinks it's going to be an Italian pope instead of Tagle. And he went for Pietro Parolin, who's another cardinal who's in the running. But how do Italians, I guess, generally feel about Pope Francis? How have they felt about this stretch where there hasn't been an Italian pope? How has that sort of impacted Italian society and soft power, if you will, with the Vatican being there?
I think Italians embrace popes just because they're on their doorstep, and just because whether you are particularly religious or not, it's such an important figure in your life as a child, in your daily life. You just see St. Peter's Dome from so far away and from all parts of the city. But if I have to look at sort of general Italian friends or colleagues, I think the church very much holds a strong cultural and historical symbolism for a lot of them, but that doesn't translate necessarily into having deep faith or rigorously sticking, let's say, to church principles or even church attendance. I mean, I think the figures are that only about, I think it's like 20% of Italians actually go to Mass every Sunday or once a week. And that's a sharp decline from, let's say, decades earlier. But a lot of Italians would call themselves spiritual rather than religious, and especially because of sort of, let's say, gay rights, divorce, abortion. And don't forget that a lot of Italian school children go to church schools or go to Catholic schools, and a lot of them don't have great memories of that. But I have to say that when it comes to, let's say, once you start having children, a lot of people will baptize their babies. A lot will get their children to do their first communion, which comes around the age of 10. It's often hard to get your teenagers to do their confirmation around the ages of 15 and 16, but you can always do that before getting married, and a lot do get married in church because I think the optics are a big part of it, and Italian churches tend to be very, very beautiful and a lot lot prettier than registry offices.
Well, then, speaking of those optics, Juliet, I mean, part of the reason that there has not been an Italian pope for the last 4 decades or so is because the growth in Christianity and the Catholic Church has come from the global south and other places. Do you imagine that an Italian pope would make a difference there, might reverse the trend in Italy and Europe?
Well, let's look at it. Italy has the largest number of voters in any case, and that's 17. Then you have 10 cardinals from the US, 7 from Brazil, 5 from France, and then you have, sort of 3 from Germany, 2 from Switzerland, and so on. So what has to be remembered is that the voting is not necessarily going to take place for geographical reasons. It's more going to be about in which direction do we think this next pope should take the church. And that would mean more progressive, more moderate, let's say, Francis 2.0, or reverse and go to the more conservative. Do we want to look at a couple of the papabili from Italy?
Let's look at a few more. You gave us one of the names you think it might be. There is Pietro Parolin, as I mentioned as well. But tell us some of the favorites.
We looked at Matteo Zuppi. There is Cardinal Pietro Parolin. His name appears a lot. He's been in the news a lot, also because he was Pope Francis's number 2. He was the equivalent of the Vatican's prime minister. And he's also come up a lot precisely because of what you mentioned, that so many cardinals come from, let's call them far-flung places around the world, which was what Francis wanted to do to make the church more inclusive. But that means that a lot of them don't know each other. In the old days, they were mainly Europeans. They would have seen each other on a regular basis and would have actually known each candidate personally. In this case, Parolin, because of his job representing the Vatican around the world, he has met probably most of these cardinal electors. Here's the thing. From a theological perspective, he's also quite balanced. So he's not too traditional. He's not too, let's say, contemporary, although he's against sort of the same-sex marriage and euthanasia. But there's also controversy regarding, and I'm not going to go into too much of the details, but regarding a still kept secret pact that took place, or agreement that was signed between the Vatican and China in 2018 on the appointment of bishops. Very controversial. We can go into it in another show when we want to talk about China. But that might be something that will go against Parolin's candidacy, as well as the fact that he's not as charismatic as Francis, Chris. Let's look at it that way. So he's diplomatic, but maybe a bit too vanilla. And speaking of flavors, the other top Italian contender is Cardinal Pierbattista Pizzaballa. And I know that that name has been attracting a lot of attention from people who wouldn't usually be Pope watchers because of the name Pizzaballa, dancing pizza. But on a serious note, he is a strong candidate because he's a bit like Francis. He's very open. He's a diplomat and he knows his geopolitics. He's been based in the Middle East for years. He's a patriarch of Jerusalem. He's been in the Holy Land for a long time. He supports interfaith dialogue between Muslims, Jews, Christians, and he's often advocated for peace during this last Gaza conflict. Actually, he made the headlines when he said, Chris, that he'll be willing to put himself forward as a hostage in exchange for Israeli children.
That is quite something. Juliet, we're going to be back with you for more unpacking this over the coming days, I'm sure. But thank you for the moment. That was Juliet Linley, the former Vatican correspondent. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Now, it's been 85 years since the launch of the BBC World News Finnish section, which broadcast news in Finnish until 1997. Former Deputy Prime Minister of Finland, Pertti Salolainen, who worked for the BBC, has been in London to mark the occasion, and he sat down with Monocle's Tom Webb at Finland's ambassador's residence to talk more about the importance of the anniversary.
I was here ambassador for 8 years here in London at this place. But before that, I was the Deputy Prime Minister of Finland, and I was for 39 years Member of Parliament also, and a Cabinet Minister for 8 years. Before that, I was working as the London correspondent of Finnish Broadcasting Corporation, and then also for the Bush Finns with the BBC Finnish section.
Now, the Bush Finns is a term that I'm just now getting familiar with. Can you tell me what a Bush Finn is?
A Bush Finn is a person who was a journalist and who was working here in London at Bush House. The Finnish service started here after the Winter War, Finnish Winter War with Russia, 1940. And it was kind of a security arrangement because we didn't know what was in the mind of the Soviets then. So that is why it was kind of security arrangement. And it was very important in those days because we were broadcasting, BBC news and information from here. During those times, Finnish media was not, not that free.
Because we were learning from the ambassador tonight that Finland is a very different place than it was in the 40s. Can you explain how it has changed?
Well, first of all, Finland has been chosen for 8 years as the happiest country in the world. And Finland has changed, of course, enormously from the war times. And we are now members of the European Union. I was the chief negotiator. When I was the deputy prime minister, I was negotiating Finland into the European Union. And then afterwards, we became members of NATO. And now we are a NATO country. So these are fundamental changes in Finnish foreign policy. And then economy has been quite good, although in all European countries during last 10 years or so, economy has been quite bad in that sense that there is not enough growth.
And if we can talk about the media landscape, the BBC Finnish World Service ended in 1997. Did it need to go?
Well, the fact is that Finland had become so free from the, Soviet influence, that it was not needed anymore because the media was free enough in Finland. So that is the explanation why BBC thought that it is no more necessary because Finland was already safe. So that was the reason why the program was stopped.
And what was your favorite memory of the service?
Well, I loved the liberty and the freedom of speech, which was there, and then the friends, the partners who were working, and it was a very nice free atmosphere. We had a lot of freedom to say things, and that is why it was so important then. Of course, many interesting things happened. There was one funny thing. As a matter of fact, it was a dangerous thing. I had just started in Bush House, so I was reading my first news. One of my colleagues thought that it would be a funny thing to put light on the papers from which I was reading, and the flames were coming up and up. I was losing, the text, but it was of course totally forbidden and very dangerous. But that is one of the most dangerous situations I can remember from those times.
Finally then, could you just give us a sense of the kind of challenges that Finnish media faces today?
Well, one of the problems is of course that the countryside paper, those are in difficulties in the countryside. But the main media, they are quite in good shape. They are in good shape, and I can say that Finnish media is very free. We are very proud that we have a free media.
And there isn't any risk of any Russian interference?
Well, I hope they wouldn't try, because that wouldn't be successful at all. No, there are no efforts by the Russians, no. The Russians are now forgotten.
That was Tom Webb in conversation with Finland's former Deputy Prime Minister Pertti Salolainen. This is The Briefing. And finally, on today's show, the Met Gala in New York is at the top of the celebrity fashion calendar, and yesterday's show, for the first time, focused on black menswear and tailoring, which, as I understand it, meant a little less of the usual exuberance and more sharp dressing. But here to explain exactly what this year's theme actually looked like is Monocle's fashion director, Natalie Theodosi, who joins me right here in the studio. Good afternoon, Natalie.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me again.
Always good to have you on. Let's start with, before we get to this one, what is it about the Met Gala?
So I think it's over the years has become this big production, and it's so performative. Every celebrity goes there. The outfits are over the top. So it used to be a very local fashion event to raise money for the Costume Institute. I remember stories that back in the 90s, the editors of Vogue and Harper's Bazaar would actually alternate as hosts, and they would mostly just invite their friends, people in the creative circle of New York. Everyone would just pick up an outfit from a showroom the night before, and that was it. But Anna Wintour, editor of American Vogue, has really taken it over, reimagined it, and made it into this larger-than-life affair where brands are paying hundreds of thousands of pounds to be there, to buy tables and to bring celebrities. So it's actually a huge part of their marketing budgets. They're paying for people to fly in. They make costumes from scratch, and it's a real work of art to make them every year. And then the aftermath of it all, the red carpet, the communications after. So it's a huge affair that has kind of trickled into the mainstream and into pop culture rather than just something that's about the fashion industry and a fashion exhibition.
A larger-than-life affair and over the top, as you say. But that was not necessarily the case this year. Is it fair to say this was more subdued, but in a good way?
Exactly. I think it was in a very good way. The Met Gala and the way that people are dressed is always tied to the theme of the exhibition. And over the last few years, people have really just taken creative license with their interpretations. And of course, with social media being a big part of the equations and everyone chasing their viral moment, they really would go all out. And I think one of the funniest things is that everyone would need like a bus to arrive to the Met Gala because that's how big the gown was. Yeah, there was like one bus per celebrity attendance. Now the theme was black tailoring. The exhibition is called Superfine. So everyone had to respect the theme and really focus on the tailoring. And I think it was an opportunity first to turn the spotlight on a crop of designers who don't create those extravagant gowns and wouldn't usually get any attention around an event like the Met Gala. But also, instead of just the story and the focus being on gimmick, it was a lot more about the art of tailoring, craft, and the history of black menswear.
Had we forgotten the art of tailoring? Is that part of what this was about?
I think we had forgotten it for a long time. I mean, that's why streetwear had come up. But it's been something that's been bubbling up ever since, I would say, the end of the pandemic. People started to recognize the beauty of tailoring, and rather than having to wear a suit to go to work, they've started to choose to wear a suit. So, and designers have been thinking about it. They've tried to create suits with more innovative sportswear-inspired materials to loosen up the silhouette, to just reinterpret what it means to wear a suit and break the rules. I mean, I love our neighbor, menswear tailor Charlie Casely Hayford, always wearing a loose suit with his Doc Martens. So people are playing around with it a lot more, and I think this is almost a crescendo where you're really celebrating tailoring in all its decadence, because the focus was black dandyism at the end of the day. So it's a new level of tailoring and how you wear it.
And then on that too, just finding, Natalie, the fact that this was about black tailoring, black menswear specifically, this had never had its moment at the Met Gala before.
No, it's the first time. It's been a conversation that the head curator, Andrew Bolton, has been having ever since the passing of André Leon Talley, who was a great Vogue contributor and one of the few black men to be a contributor and an editor in American Vogue. So in some ways it was an homage to him, but it's also an homage to the contributions of black creatives and black designers to tailoring and to shaping culture. And I think that there's so much to dig in that exhibition. And I think the most fascinating thing, and it's something quite universal that everyone can take away, is this idea of putting on your Sunday's best that the Black community has always embraced, and also clothing and that idea of the sharp suit as a form of defiance, as a form of presenting yourself in the best way possible, no matter your class or your race. So it's a beautiful theme. There's a lot to uncover, and a lot of younger designers like Grace Wales-Bonner here in London, Torisha Jujumi, who now have their works featured in the Costume Institute.
Natalie Theodosi, Monocle's fashion director, thank you very much for joining us and unpacking all that. That's all the time we have for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Tom Webb. Our researcher was Francesca Jilks, and our studio manager was Lily Austin. The Briefing is back tomorrow at the same time. I'm Chris Chermak. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.